Now, you're welcome to follow along in the Bibles, but we're not going to read the 2 chapters because we'll be here all day. Otherwise, we'll take up the whole time just reading 2 chapters. But so this week we return to the Gospel according to Moses. And last week we had a look at Ezekiel chapters 36 to 39, which about the nations that were going to come up against Israel in the Gog-Magog war. But we also noted that there were going to be a few nations that weren't going to go up against Israel. And those are the nations which we're looking at in a part today. And this is that's especially in chapter 2, and we'll come to that in a moment. This is important to the whole history that Moses is relating to the Israelites, because he's giving them a potted history of their journey from the time that they left Egypt to the present time, where they are poised, as it were, to cross the river Jordan into the promised land. Except Moses himself, he can't cross over, and therefore he's giving these sermons of a sort, but is giving a bit of history. And in verse 1 of chapter 2, he covers 38 years of history in just a few words. And he says it by saying, well, we skirted Mount Seir many days. Well, those many days were 38 years, okay? So that's not a short period of time. But that's all as much as that Moses is willing to give to that time. As far as he's concerned, they're lost years. And now he's coming to their most recent history and the land that they've just passed through in their journey north from Mount Seir, which is in the south. Let me just get that working, hopefully. So Mount Seir is here, where my finger is. It doesn't say it on the map, but it's there. Okay, so they've been going around this whole area. They should have crossed over at Kadesh Barnea into the promised land when they first came out of Egypt, but because they were being a bit rebellious, they didn't cross over. And so now they're coming up through Edom, Moab, and Ammon, and they're here right now where my finger is to cross over into the promised land. After this, if we get through these 2 chapters today, we're going to be spending 2-3 weeks in chapter 4. And then we're going to be speeding through the rest of the chapters after that. So just giving you some kind of idea where we're going. Chapter 4 is jam-packed. But we'll see how far we actually get today. So we see from the map that this is the land that God has granted to these particular populations. And we see in verse 5. Deuteronomy 2 verse 5. I'm reading from the New King James, so it's slightly different maybe. Actually, if I have a Bible, can somebody pass me... Thank you very much. I'll read it from the NIV instead. Of course, it's small writing. Okay, so 2 verse 5. I'll just turn over the page. Right. So 2 verse 5 says, do not provoke them to war, for I will not give you any of their land, not even enough to put your foot on. I have given Esau the hill country of Seir as his own. So Mount Seir is down here, as I said, but all of this land, it belongs to Edom, and Edom is the other name for Esau, who was Jacob's brother. All right. What's the other name for Jacob? Israel. Okay, so this is Israel's brother. Okay, then we go to verse 9. It says this: the Lord said to me, do not harass the Moabites or provoke them to war, for I will not give you any part of their land. I have given Ar to the descendants of Lot as a possession. So you can see Moab there. And then in verse 19, It says this: when you come to the Ammonites, do not harass them or provoke them to war, for I will not give you possession of any land that belongs to the Ammonites. I've given it as a possession to the descendants of Lot. And we know that we are given additional information in the chapters. You see that anything that's in brackets in Deuteronomy is being added by the editor. Right? This has been added time after Moses, and it's been added for clarification, because the people who came after Moses, once they're into the promised land, they think, well, who are these people he's talking about? Because they don't go by these names anymore. Okay, like even today, these don't go by these names today. Today, this area is Jordan. Yeah, so, and it's like us giving a postscript as well. Anyway, I'll come to that a little bit later. Well, actually, I mean, looking at 2 verse 12, it says this, and it's a part of the brackets. It says, Horites used to live in Seir, but the descendants of Esau drove them out. They destroyed the Horites from before them and settled in their place, just as Israel did in the land the Lord gave them as a possession. Wait a minute, they haven't gone into the promised land yet, and so it must be an editorial note. We know that. That's just so you know that someone's done that. The important thing for us to note is that God is involved in the exoduses of people from the beginning. He brought the Philippines, the Philistines. He probably brought the Philippines into their land as well, but he brought the Philistines into the land in the 13th century, which is 1 or 2 centuries after Moses. And we read about them in Judges. We also read about them in this, because it's part of the editorial notes that they came into the land which is now Gaza, the Philistines, and they came into the land to trouble the Israelites because they weren't living according to God's law. And then we had to wait for a judge by the name of Samson. Remember Samson? Supposedly strong, but he wasn't strong. He was a weakling like me, who had massive strength because God gave it to him. Yes. And then we have other nations mentioned here in brackets as well. It's just to clarify what Moses was talking about. It's a bit like us talking about the Ottoman Empire. You talk to anyone who's young today, they haven't got a clue. They don't know their history of this time. The Ottoman Empire existed for over 600 years, and it covered massive land from Saudi Arabia, Turkey being the emphasis word, because really it's the Turkish Empire, and they had all of North Africa. They were right on the border of Austria, so they had Hungary. They even had Ukraine. And all that land belonged to the Ottoman Empire. But we have to say, well, it's the Turkish Empire today to people to help them understand that it wasn't called Turkey in those days. So it's like us, we're giving names to things so that the people who are reading this at the time can understand what's going on. And yeah. So, but let's be clear. I've been going through all of these verses. I haven't shown any of them up here. Let's be clear that God is sovereign over the nations, as Pharaoh as Pharaoh was told here in Exodus 9:16. But indeed, for this purpose I have raised you up, that I may show my power in you, and that my name may be declared in all the earth. Well, who were these people that God gave the land to on their journey north? So Edom, of course, we heard is a name given to Esau, who was Jacob's brother, who's Israel. Then you have the Moabites and the Ammonites. Now, who on earth are these people? Well, we're told, aren't we? We're told that they are somehow related to Lot. And Lot was the nephew of Abraham. Right? Remember, he lived in Sodom, and then and he was told, "Get out, run for your lives." And his wife became a pillar of salt because she looked behind, and he ran off with 2 of his daughters, yeah, and they ended up in a cave. And you know what happened in that cave? If you read your Bible, you know what happened, because if you've been reading through your readings, you know that the two daughters got him drunk and then slept with him without him knowing what he was doing, and they both became pregnant. And Moab and Ammon were the result of this, and then they become big tribes of their own. So you have the Ammonites and the Moabites. The Bible doesn't hide any of this stuff, does it? So there you go. So some incestuous relationship. They weren't brothers, but they were near relatives. But as I read from Zephaniah 2 last week, from Zephaniah 2, we know that the Moabites and the Ammonites eventually get destroyed because they mistreat the Israelites, and so that's part of history now. But there is a famous Moabite. Do you know who I'm talking about? A girl, woman. Ruth, absolutely, yes. Good, I'm glad you really know your Bible. It's really good stuff. So Ruth was a Moabite. Of course, Moabites weren't allowed to be part of Israel, but this one managed to get in and became part of the genealogy of Jesus. So Jesus is a descendant of Ruth. So God has been looking after even these three nations for this particular time, and what Moses is trying to say, look, he's looked out for these nations. He will care for you as well. He's cared for you for 40 years whilst you've been on this journey. He's carried you as a father carries his son, and God is now giving you the land of Canaan, the other side of the River Jordan. God is faithful in keeping his word. But the point that Moses is saying is that you think that you're special, Israel. Careful of thinking too mightily about that, because God is involved in the affairs of all humans. Yes, Israel is chosen. They have been given a promised land, but God's at work in all the nations. And no one can stop the plan of God. The land has been given as a gift to the Edomites, the Ammonites, to the Moabites, but also to Israel. And we read here that even Gaza was given to the Philistines. So all of these things are interesting. But now we come to an interesting two groups of people called the Amorites and the Canaanites. Okay, so let's not confuse Ammonites and Amorites. Okay, Ammonites are a relative of Israel. Amorites are related to the Canaanites. So now these two, it's a different story altogether. So from verse 24 onwards, we see this. Let me read it from the NIV. From chapter 2, 24 and 25. Set out now and cross the Arnon Gorge. See, I have given into your hands Sihon the Amorite, king of Heshbon, and his country. Begin to take possession of it and engage him in battle. This very day I will begin to put terror and fear of you on all the nations under heaven. They will hear reports of you and will tremble and be in anguish because of you. So he is wanting to give this people, this new generation of Israelites. Remember, the old generation, they've all died out. All the ones that saw the power of God against Egypt with Pharaoh, they all died now. Well, at least all those who were 20 and above. Okay, and he's wanting to give now these people, this new generation, an experience of his power and might that they would not forget. This was going to be invaluable as a life lesson for them. He's telling the Amorite king. So Moses, of course, he wants to be peaceful with all the nations. Just so you know, he's passed through Edom, he's passed through Moab, he's passed through Ammon. Been very peaceful. They've been able to go along the King's Highway. They've been able to buy food for them, and all this. Been nice and peaceful. But now he sends a kind of ambassadorship to Sihon, the king of the Amorites, says, let us pass through your land. We don't want your territory. Our territory is on the other side. Don't worry about us. But instead, Sihon comes out against them with an army and wouldn't let them pass. But they had to pass because it was the only way through. And we are given the explanation in verse 30. But Sihon, king of Heshbon, refused to let us pass through, for the Lord your God had made his spirit stubborn and his heart obstinate, in order to give him into your hands, as he has now done. Does that sound familiar? Does that sound like a particular one called Pharaoh, whose heart was also hardened? And God made the situation something that the Israelites couldn't avoid. They have had no conflict for 38 years, but now they have to trust him. They have to trust him. And of course, they took the land. They defeated Sihon, and they left no one alive. Now, I'll be addressing the fact that everyone gets destroyed when we come to chapter 7. All right. It also comes up in chapter 20, but we'll deal with it in chapter 7, particularly about why women and children got killed as well. And we'll deal with that. Hard topic, but something we will deal with when we come to it. And then we see that we go on. They go on further in their journey into chapter 3, I think this is, from Aroer, which is on the edge of the valley of Arnon, from the city which is in the valley as far as Gilead. There was not a city too high for us. Oh yes, this is what we're saying. You remember that when the spies first went into the land, they said, oh, the cities are so tall, we can't conquer them. Of course, two of them said, well, actually, Joshua and Caleb said, well, of course, we can do it. With God's help, we can do it. From your point of view, you can't do it, but with God, everything is possible. And it's very interesting that this land that they've now just taken had high walls, high cities, and all this, and they defeated them. So it proved. But now we have a really unhelpful division in the chapters here. There should be no, chapters, they were put in the 13th century. Okay, so 800 years ago, we suddenly had chapters being put into our Bibles, and they put them in really strange places at times. So it is in this case, because we're in the middle of a story right now. Here, now they have to go a little bit further north. They're going to come against another king of the Amorites by the name of Og. Og. Good name, isn't it? You want to call your kids that, Og? And they were going to take this land too, and nobody was going to stand in God's way. And they did. They defeated him. They took 60 cities and destroyed all the people. But this was a supersized king. A supersized king. Remember, there were giants in the land. And it mentions his bed here. And his bed was 15 feet. 13? It's not right. 15. That's right, 6 feet. It was 6 foot wide, but it was 15 feet long. But even if it was 13, that's still quite something, isn't it? And it was made of iron. And of course, this was the beginning of the Iron Age. So iron was more precious than gold in these days, in the new era of iron. And they put it on display in their museum of sorts. Is it still not there? You can go and have a look at it if you want to. You can't today, by the way. I don't think it's there now. But and then we find from verse 12 in chapter 3 onward that the land is given to the Israelites, specifically to the tribes of Reuben, Gad, and half of the tribe of Manasseh. Half of the tribe of Manasseh stayed on. Half the tribe stayed on one side of the Jordan, and the other half, the tribe of Manasseh, crossed over and took that part. In Deuteronomy 3:18, we see that I commanded you at that time, the Lord your God has given you this land to take possession of it, but all your able-bodied men, this is the 2.5 tribes that are staying on this side of the Jordan, you have said that you're going to go ahead of us and fight the battles. So they were going to go ahead and fight the battles on their behalf. But it's kind of strange, really, because these 2.5 tribes came to Moses in the first place and said, actually, we'd rather stay on this side of the Jordan. But instead, what we find here, it says that the Lord your God has given you this land to possess. So you have a combination of man and God. Now, man making a request, but God saying, "I've given you this land as a possession." In fact, we read earlier when in the first battle that he says that I am giving you this land as a possession. Begin to take it now. And that was before these 2.5 tribes even came to Moses and said, actually, we like it on this side. We'll have it. So, because nothing catches out God by surprise. And then we find that Joshua, on verse 21, says this, 21 and 22, at the time I commanded Joshua, you have seen with your own eyes all that the Lord your God has done to these 2 kings. The Lord will do the same. See, this is why it's a lesson for all the Israelites. Right? They've never experienced war. Now they've experienced war, and now they can say, okay, well, now we can really trust God. That what he says he will do. When we cross over, he will win the battles for us. The Lord will do the same to all the kingdoms over there where you are going. Do not be afraid of them. The Lord your God himself will fight for you. And we've seen before that it's the Lord who raises people up and removes them. And here we see Joshua is being raised up and Moses is starting to be removed. The people are in God's hand. And it seems also that God is in the choices that people make, at least here in this passage. Here then we follow, finally, we'll finish with the prayer of Moses. The prayer of Moses. Let's see if we can get to this. And we're looking specifically at 3:23 to 26. Maybe someone else would like to read that. Would somebody like to read those 4 verses, 23 to 26. The prayer of Moses.
At that time, is that the one?
Yes. Yeah.
At that time I pleaded with the Lord, O sovereign Lord, you began to show your servant your greatness and your strong hand. For what God is there in heaven or on earth, who can do the deeds and mighty works you do? Let me go over and see the good land beyond Jordan, that fine hill country, and Lebanon.
And one more, yeah.
But because of you, the Lord was angry with me and would not listen to me. That is enough, the Lord said. Do not speak to me any more about this matter.
So he begs to be allowed into the promised land, but God gives an emphatic no. I don't want to even hear you ask me again about this. And then Moses says, because of you people, I'm not going to cross over into the land. He says it's their fault. And 3 times he says it. We've read about it in chapter 1. We'll read again about it in chapter 4. But here he blames the people. Hang on, But actually, that wasn't God's verdict of the situation at all. In Deuteronomy 32, we hear God's verdict. God's verdict says, because you trespassed against me among the children of Israel, because you did not hallow me, you didn't make me holy in the sight of the children of Israel. Because remember, he struck the rock twice in anger. He said, do I need to bring water out of this rock for you? As if he could do it, And God wouldn't have let Moses get away with passing the buck. If Moses didn't go into the land, it's because it's his own fault. Moses sinned. But is Moses kind of right? Is it the people's fault? And actually the answer is yes. It is the people's fault as well. that he didn't go into the land. If the Israelites had entered the land from Kadesh Barnea in the first place, none of this would have arisen in the first place. It would never have happened. Everything would be nice and peaceful. He would be there in the promised land, and he would have been enjoying it for the previous 38 years already. And in some sense, Moses was bearing more of the suffering of his people than was his personal due. He was not himself an innocent victim, but he suffered because of the people's sin, a sin which he had not directly shared in, but induced his own failure. He was so fed up with the fact that they were rebellious against God that he himself sinned as a result. And in a way, he entered into the suffering of his people and of the God of his people in a way that, like so much else in his life, foreshadowed what God would do for us in Jesus Christ. He would offer a blameless life for the sin of us all. How hard this decision must have been for Moses, right? But note how he prayed. He prayed with dignity and with respect to God, because prayer is an act of worship. Well, I might have this up. And it's grounded in the fact that God is a great God. And despite his sin and the consequences, God heard his prayer. And these are the three things that prayer does, according to this chapter. Prayer changes things. Yeah. It changes how God responds to us. And it changes us, for God gets us to see things his way. I've often found with prayer that I pray about certain things, and actually my own mind has been changed about it as a result. It's very strange in a way. You know, you come at it one way and you leave with a different viewpoint, and actually what you're seeing is God's viewpoint on the matter. And it's a work of the Holy Spirit in us when he does that. And just as a note, Moses never did mention it again to God. He did mention it again to the Israelites. But he himself didn't. But prayer is really important, for it really makes a difference to us and also to circumstances. Yeah. So it's something that we should bear in mind. A lot of things there, but I think mainly that when we look at the world situation today, we have to bring it into the present tense, don't we? And we see that God has given land to all of our people groups, including us. Yeah. And God is quite able to take it away again. And when sin gets to a level, of course it's not mentioned here about the level of sin, it's mentioned elsewhere in scriptures where, as far as the Amorites and the Canaanites are concerned, it says when their sin got to a point where God said, I've had enough of this, and ejected them from the land. And he did it with Israel on 2 different occasions as well. Said, I've had enough of you, Israel. And he brought the Babylonians in, and then he brought the Assyrians in. So, at times when even Israel suffered as a result. But God gives people land, and it's a gift from God. Yeah. No one can claim their land this is my land. It's always God's. And also bear in mind the prayer as well. So, any questions at all on any of that?
I just wondered why so many people have been destroyed, all these different ones they were all destroyed, but it's because they went on sin, is it?
Yes, I will come to the theology of that in chapter 7. So I want to leave that as a teaser because it's not as straightforward as like me to answer it now. Yeah. So all right. Okay, great. Can't find my cursor anywhere.